Good morning, friends. It is still morning time. My name is Danné Davis. I am, I guess, part of the trio working to help host the Critical Scholarship Colloquium series. I want to thank the ADP, or the team would like to thank the ADP Center for hosting us, and certainly appreciation to the Dean's Office for providing the scrumptious muffins that many of you are enjoying, along with the hot tea and coffee. I want to welcome you to this final installation version of our Colloquium series, but certainly, hopefully, this will not be the last of conversations around the important work that many of us are doing here in the college for education and engaged learning. Again, the series is designed to bring people together, scholars, graduate students, folks who are doing work around education, to have conversations on the hottest scholarship within the discipline, again, to help us think, problem solve, and attend to situations. Happy for today and that our colleague Minkyung Choi has agreed to share her scholarship today, and just a little bit of a background for her. Dr. Choi is Assistant Professor of Literacy in the Department of Teaching and Learning at Montclair State University. Her research interests include literacy instruction in P16 settings and the use of narrative to explore the lived experience of students, refugee populations, and immigrants. Specifically, she is interested in the use of narrative inquiry and participatory action research methodologies as a way to challenge dominant narratives. Min has collaborated with UNICEF USA and the Obama Foundation on storytelling initiatives, and she is also the recipient of a Mellon Foundation grant and a Library of Congress grant. We love it when people are earning awards and monies. Her work has appeared in the Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy, the Journal of College Reading and Learning, and the International Journal of Qualitative Studies and Education. So I want to thank the people in the room who are present. We also have an audience online. If folks are having any technical issues or concerns or want to post questions, you certainly may do so when that time arises. And I will now turn the podium and the microphone over to my colleague, Dr. Choi.
Thank you. I was jokingly telling Eunice yesterday that I would be 20% of the audience, but I did not expect such a turnout. So thank you so much for attending. This is a project that is, really near and dear to my heart. It's a project that I've been working on since the summer of 2022. And to give a little bit of background, there's a lot of work on participatory action research. My sort of coming into this was to really think about participatory action research, or PAR, as a way to challenge dominant narratives. I come from teaching at a community college in the Bronx for 9 years, and one thing that I noticed immediately was that when you look at a lot of the research and the policies around community college students, a lot of the depictions look at community college students through a very deficit lens, and so they see them as students who sort of drain financial aid, students who ultimately end up failing in their educational or academic trajectories. And what I noticed when I was there was that there were so many stories that are really untold. I had a student in my first year who, she was what we call a triple developmental or triple remedial student. So she placed in remedial math, reading, and writing. In the first, I would say, like 5 or 6 weeks of the semester, she told me, I have to withdraw because I have to protest on behalf of Meek Mill and his arrest. And she withdrew, and students like her would be seen as a failure in the system. She returned the next semester. We worked together. She transferred with a full scholarship to Howard University, and she is currently working at a think tank in Washington, D.C. So these are the stories that are untold, and the way I see PAR is a way to really challenge those narratives. So what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit about, I'm going to give you a little bit of context about refugees in the United States, the background. So this is a huge project that sort of includes bits and pieces and different parts of different projects. And then I'll talk a little bit about future implications. And in case you thought you'd come here today just to listen, we're going to do a quick talk and turn at the end and reflect on our own sort of practices and service and research as well. So refugees in the United States, in the first 8 months of 2023, nearly, over almost 32,000 refugees resettled in the United States, which is more than any year since 2017, for many reasons, whether for political, economic instability, increasingly now, I think for environmental reasons, we see huge numbers of refugee populations resettling in the United States. So this is definitely a population that we have to be concerned about, a population that we really need to think about how to support in our research and our practices. So as you can see, if you look at policies and if you look at the numbers of refugees coming into the United States, a lot of it is really determined by different policies, different, the government. A lot of it is also determined by the research that is being put out. Just to give once again a bit of context, in between 2001 and 2022, a lot of the resettled populations in the United States came from Burma or Myanmar, Iraq, Somalia, etc. So my study really takes place in Clarkston, Georgia, which is located in Atlanta, located near Atlanta. And Clarkston is a very small town. Clarkston is about 1 square mile, so it's pretty small. And since the 1980s, we see that Clarkston has really become a hub for resettled refugees because of its proximity to Atlanta. It's about, I would say, maybe 30 minutes away from Atlanta. Affordable housing options and also access to public transportation and major highways. The population has more than doubled in 10 years from 2010 to 2020. Over half of the population is estimated to be foreign-born, and in recent years we see huge waves of resettlement from Democratic Republic of Congo, Myanmar, Ukraine, and Afghanistan. So it's a really interesting town. I've been there twice, once for a week in summer of 2022, once last summer, and it almost feels like you're not in the United States, right? There are so many languages, just a very colorful town. There's so many murals. It's a really interesting place. The New York Times called it the most diverse square mile in the United States. Atlanta Magazine called it the Ellis Island of the South. And for more than 60,000 refugees, Clarkston was their first American home. In 1.1 square mile in the town, there are more than 60 languages being spoken. So you can sort of think of it as there's a new language every 100 square feet. Lots of diversity just in terms of linguistic diversity, racial, religious, lot of diversity. So this is a picture of Clarkston High School. Which is the one high school in the town. And students attending Clarkston High School come from over 50 countries and speak, over 60 languages. And so one of the participants that we worked with, she was a young adult with a refugee background. On reflecting on her high school experience at Clarkston High School, she said, "I remember the first day of high school. Along the walls were banners with the word welcome in different languages. I was fascinated by the diversity of languages, but more importantly, I was excited by the idea that the classroom would be a space where I could finally process some of my experiences and thoughts that had been bottled up inside me for many years." Then she said, "However, I quickly learned that the celebration of multiculturalism that was openly on display never left the walls. The different languages were never practiced in classroom discussions, and there were no opportunities to share our stories." So we see that, schools, although this school has, huge numbers of resettled refugees, refugees, that doesn't necessarily translate into pedagogy or opportunities in the classroom to share their experiences. So Mesad, who was really sort of central in this project, is a young woman with a refugee background. She identifies as Burmese because her family is from Myanmar. But she was born in a refugee camp in Thailand, and so she shared that when she tells people that she was born and raised in Thailand, people assume that she's from Phuket or from Bangkok, but she has never set foot outside of the refugee camp in Thailand. And so she gave a TED Talk because during her college education, she took a creative writing class, and that was the first opportunity that she had to really share her story, and she recognized the power in sharing her story, and so she was really proactive in looking for opportunities to do that, and she gave a TED Talk. When we met with her, when my colleague Dr. Cha, who's at George Washington University, when we met with Mesad, she really wanted us to help her create these opportunities for other youth in Clarkston. And so she felt that as an individual, she didn't really have the sort of insight in order to do that. And so she called upon us to help her. My colleague and I were very adamant from the beginning that we didn't want this to be just another research project. And we didn't want us to be in the center of this project. And we wanted Mesad and the other youth with refugee backgrounds to be central here and for them to sort of lead us and ask for our support. And so the first thing we did was we published our article in Forced Migration Review. We intentionally wanted Mesad to be the first author, and much of this article is really written through the voice of Mesad. So a lot of these are direct quotes. This is her storytelling, and we were really sort of supporting her in that. So in speaking with Mesad and talking with Mesad, we identified 3 problems. So one was that there's limited attention on localization and indigenous ways of knowing, which end up resulting in culturally irrelevant practices and policies. And number 2 was that there was a lack of community-led initiatives. And instead, we found that there was a lot of reliance on policies and initiatives that were created by other people that were not of that community. And so there was a lack of community ownership. And the third problem that we identified was that there was a lack of voice and space in scholarship, practice, and policy. And so we were really cognizant of these 3 areas. And we asked ourselves constantly, how can we invite the youth to have a voice or to provide space for that voice in scholarship, in practice, and in policy. And this we see results in the labeling of refugee youth and a deficit framework. And so our framework is a participatory action research framework. And using this framework, we wanted to know No, I'll share the research question later. So our methodological approach is modeled after McIntyre's principles, and that is that that there has to be a collective investigation of a problem, the reliance on indigenous knowledge to better understand that problem, and the desire to take individual and/or collective action to deal with the stated problem. And it's really grounded in the idea that this has to come from within the community, from the people that we are seeking to do research with. And so our approach is premised on the belief that the youth being investigated are best positioned to identify issues pertaining to their communities. And so by working with these youth, we try to identify ways in which the youth could use their voices to generate and operationalize spaces for newly resettled refugee children and youth. And so our timeline looked a little bit like this. So we started in August 2022. Initially, this was my colleague and I traveling to Clarkston, Georgia, and doing a 3-day intensive storytelling workshop. And so this was done with young adults. So this was Mesad and Mesad's friends, family. This was youth between the ages of 18 to 25. And then, part of us, we thought that this would be a 3-day workshop. It would be a great idea. We'd all go back home. But on the last day, the young adults wanted to continue. They said 3 days is not long enough. We want to continue to do this on Zoom. And so from September of 2022 to February of 2023, we did an online storytelling workshop series. We met every month for 2 hours. It was not an easy time slot because we met on Sundays from 8 to 10 p.m. Because a lot of the youth were involved in church activities, they had work, some of them were juggling 3 jobs, children, whatnot, so Sunday 8 to 10 was the only slot that we had. The first workshop in September, my colleague and we led, and we talked about school. And then we said, does anyone else have something that they want to talk about? And so organically, from October to February, each of the young adults led a workshop. So they brought in PowerPoints. One of them was a musician. She said, I want us to all write some songs. And it was very powerful, and it was something that I would never have thought of. I'm not musically inclined, and so I've never thought of, right? And some of them wanted to talk about pressure from family, in identifying with a certain culture. And once again, not necessarily something that I would have thought of on my own, but this was really youth-led. As we sort of neared the end of the year, there were questions about, how do we bring what we're doing here outside? Like, how do we let people know that we're doing this? And how do we let people know that we can do this kind of stuff? And so we started to organize a talk at a diversity forum in Washington, D.C. This was held by George Washington University. We funded and supported 5 youth to travel to George Washington University. We invited policymakers in DC. We invited faculty. We invited graduate students in various disciplines, and the youth presented their work and they presented their stories. And then after that, they said, well, I wish we had something like this when we were younger. We're all adults now, but I think if I had something like this when I was a middle school student, when I had first come to the United States, it really would have changed the trajectory of my life. And so we started to plan a summer camp, right? So they said we should do a summer camp for middle school and high school students in Clarkston. And so from the spring, from about March to June, we planned a storytelling summer camp for children with refugee backgrounds in Clarkston. And so that's sort of the journey, that's the trajectory, that's the timeline. And so initially, in the very first storytelling workshop, one of our participants said, especially for people like us, sometimes it's very hard to accept our own story because from the moment I was born, I have stamped on my forehead the label as a refugee. We never are really given the space to appreciate who we are and our culture. And what's really interesting, which is a current study that I'm doing, is looking at how the stories change over time as well. This is a picture from our first storytelling camp in the summer of 2022. And this is a picture from the Diversity Summit in Washington, D.C. This was a really moving event because it was the first time that a lot of these young people, first of all, traveled to Washington, D.C., and were able to speak to policymakers and faculty and graduate students. So a lot of them were really overwhelmed by just emotion and the fact that everybody was listening. And I think that was a really pivotal moment for their sort of storytelling identities to take off. And so these are some quotes that we collected from the reflection section. So one of them said, I had no idea what storytelling is. I always thought that because we are so similar, maybe one story is enough to cover everyone's story. And so I never thought of my story as my own story. But I'm learning that my story is uniquely my story, and that's very personal. And so this kind of speaks to how we tend to generalize populations and their experiences and their stories. Another participant said, Processing through storytelling allows me to connect different story pieces, and it enabled me to catch that all along. Today, I can share my personal journey and go after my desire of being an educator, especially for students who have a similar background as me. So Mesad, who first started to work with us, she is actually completing her master's in a teacher education program in Colorado. So she is looking to become a teacher for students like herself. And so these are this is some information about the summer camp that we put together. It took place in Clarkston. This was last July. And the leads were 5 of the young adults that sort of came with us, throughout this journey. We had one on-site coordinator, and if it were not for her, this would not have happened. We had 2 facilitators, which were myself and my colleague, and then we had 10 volunteers. We had local NGOs team up with us, support us, even if it was just a meal from Chick-fil-A to feed our kids, whatever it may be, we had local support. And then we had 15 participants aged between 12 and 18 with refugee/immigrant experiences. Some of them, although they themselves were not resettled refugees, they had parents who were refugees, and so they also identified as being children with refugee backgrounds. Many different nationalities, ethnicities, Chin, Karen, Nepali, et cetera, et cetera. From the very first planning process, it was really youth-led, and so this is the flyer that they created for volunteers. We had another flyer for campers, and then this was a recruitment video that one of the young adults created. He's currently a student at Boston College, so he did this. It was during the semester, so he did this on his campus, and he sent it in, and he spread it around to everybody that he knew. And so our camp was called Stories Worth Sharing. And it was a 1-week camp or a 5-day camp, and on the final day we had parents come in. And I could tell you all about what we did, but I think it'll also be better for me to show you, so this is sort of a 3-minute video of the camp. Okay, so that was our camp, and it was really amazing because it was a multimodal storytelling camp, and so students got to choose what modality they wanted to tell their stories in. So we have some preliminary, because it's still research, right? So we have some preliminary findings. So we found that and this is based on the young adults that were leading the PAR, right? So we're talking about the 5 leads. And we found 3 themes that occurred in the reflections, and one was that it was really important for them to know that they could create a safe space for self-discovery for the children, for the youth. And so one of our leads said, our stories are very different, but in some ways our emotions, our feelings are very similar. I think it's really special because I'm also providing space for other people to feel and express their emotions. Another said, I think providing the space will encourage, at least to remind them that we have the opportunity to share stories. And the second theme that came up was learning the importance of listening. And so one of our leads said, I think it's a really big change in my life. Like, I'm trying to listen to people more and trying to understand their perspectives and their point of view a lot. So one of them said, I'm so used to talking about myself, but here as a lead, as a storyteller, as a storytelling facilitator, I really had to listen and learn to listen. Another said, I think when we think about storytelling, you think about talking, but it's also like the activity of listening to other people, and that was something that I kind of learned. And the final piece was relational accountability. One of them said, what I learned most was relational accountability. It's not about like trying to get the work done together. It's about providing the space for the work to be done and trusting and waiting on the work to almost grow. And it did, which I thought was really deep and insightful. One other person said, storytelling is such a deeply impersonal, so deeply impersonal, intimate. What that means is a lot of probing over time and patience, and it's hard to do it. It barely happens on your own. So it needs to be like a collective, communal effort, and it needs to be that mutual accountability and commitment to holding the space together. And this is a quote from our on-site coordinator, Sarah, who also drew this image. So to kind of explain this, she described the 2 figures on the outside as me and my colleague as sort of creating a space. And then the 5 leads here in blue, the young adults with refugee backgrounds, and then the students from the camp are the sprouts. And so Sarah said that through this project, the young adults were able to join hands and cultivate stories about ourselves, each other, and our neighborhoods. Stories take time to grow, but when they are cared for in community, they will take root, bear fruit, and spread even more stories. So in looking at the implementation, because it wasn't all easy and smooth sailing, some of the challenges that we came across or encountered was major one was recruitment, right? In this community, there are so many community events that take place in the summer. You have multiple NGOs and churches and groups scheduling camps, activities, events. So trying to find and Georgia, their summer break ends really soon, really quickly. So just trying to find a time and a space was not easy. And just going out to recruit students. So, when we started recruiting in April or May, and by the time June came around, we had 1 person signed up. And so I would say most of our recruitment happened the day before the camp, where we actually, this was the first time in my life where I attended a Congolese church, which was an experience because, as many churches do, the pastor said, I'd like everyone to go around and greet other people. I did not know that meant that every single person would be greeting every single person. So that was about 30 minutes, which is really interesting. We went to a Karen church, we went to a Chin church, because that's where the youth were. And so we really went where the youth were. We had flyers, we had sign-up sheets, we took down numbers, the whole thing. So recruitment was challenging. Collecting therefore, as a related challenge, there was collecting participant information. Because we didn't have, ages, gender, ethnicity, nationality, students with disability. We didn't have this information, and a lot of this came up on the day of. And so we learned, during the camp that certain students, because of, religious reasons, they were not comfortable working with male students. We had a student who was in a wheelchair, so we had to alter a lot of the activities, some of the activities that we had, the ice-breaking activities that we had. There were language challenges where some students, we needed translators. And so we pulled people last minute in from the community. Can you work with us to translate for this student? And something that was unexpected was the class composition. We had nobody sign up for poetry, which was, one of our major sort of areas. And so poetry had to merge with creative writing. And there was one student who dance was not actually a modality that we had, but one student was really adamant about, I'm gonna do dance. And so we had to, luckily, we had somebody who majored in dance. So so a lot of this was like really last minute figuring things out. And then we had, but opportunities that we saw were partnerships with local community-based organizations. This was a really big part of, our learning, where we saw the work that communities community-based organizations are doing in Clarkston, and we were really blown away. And some of these relationships have become ongoing relationships and partnerships. Finding volunteers with specific skills, right? With artistic skills, with even teaching experience was an opportunity, because we saw that some of our volunteers had these hidden skills that we did not know of. Trust and rapport, financial support, this was an opportunity. We had, luckily, the support here and there of different institutions, organizations. And the final day, we had a celebration. Initially, I think we had 2 parents who said that they would be there. The other said, we have to work, we can't take off work. I have this and that. But it ended up everybody came. And so that was, I think, for the students at least, that was a major, a really rewarding experience. So implications for scholarship, practice, and policy. One is the importance of refugee-led, community-driven initiatives. 2 is participation throughout the program. So we're talking from design to implementation and evaluation, long process, but it's really important that we involve the students or the young people in each of these processes. And 3 is understanding the PAR limitations and opportunities, right? Definitely a lot of time and energy went into just engagement, facilitation. Even when we recruited volunteers, we had to have a 2-day intensive workshop on just ethics and things to think about as they were leading and teaching the young children. So that was an intensive training, lots of questions, lots of really interesting discussions, but those were the things we had to do. And it was really hard to find time that everyone was able to Zoom. And financial and human resources, and thinking about sustainability. And so, it's great that we do this one time and we leave, but thinking about how do we sustain this, right? In our case, so we thought, okay, last summer this would be it. Our intention from the beginning was to think about ways that we could get the youth then to do this on our own, where they wouldn't need us to help them with this. And so some of them have really taken this to the next step. One of them is filming a documentary about her life, but she's also involving different youth from the community. I know that there's talk about doing this again this summer on their own. And one of them, the one who's in the teacher education program, she and I meet every week on Zoom because she's writing a book about her life and about her experiences. And she wants to, and she's in Colorado, so she wants to come to ARA next year. So some of you, if you're there next year, you may meet her. And then finally thinking about collaboration and co-authorship. I think that in the academic space, we don't talk about co-authorship as much. And so we've really tried to intentionally open opportunities for co-authorship. I have to say, when we said, do you want to write a paper together? 9 out of 10 of them said no. So they said, is this going to be more time? Is this going to be more work? Then no. But then we started to ask, well, how do you imagine co-authorship? Like, what do you want to do, and how can we support you on that journey? So co-authorship may not look how we envision it, but it can also take other it can look other ways as well. And so when we look at the literature on youth with refugee backgrounds, these are the words that come up. If you do a literature review, if you look at articles, they're portrayed as voiceless, displaced, devastated, traumatized, vulnerable, passive, poor, hopeless, helpless, and powerless. And so part of this project was really to push back against those words and think about ways in which we could depict these youth as voiceful, as hopeful, powerful, resourceful, resilient, active, enriched, knowledgeable, with agency, with stories, with culture. We've gotten several questions, or I've gotten several questions about, well, isn't this kind of romanticizing everything and overlooking the problems? I think that there's a way to do that while recognizing the challenges that they have. And I think for us, the goal is not to romanticize, but I think it's to provide a balanced perspective where it's not just purely deficit-based. And so this is some of the artwork that came about. This is our lead team, our volunteers, our facilitators, our leads. And so that's the end of my presentation. I know that I do want to leave some time for Q&A, but I'm really curious about how, I want us to give us some time to reflect on perhaps our own research and service and our teaching and practice. And so if we could just partner up with somebody who's sitting next to you or near you. I have 2 questions here. We'll try to do this for about maybe 7 minutes, and then I'll open the floor for questions. So my first question is, think about a community that you serve or that you seek to serve, whose voices are often unheard in research, policy, and practice, and which voices speak for the community. And the second question is, how might you imagine members of that community as researchers rather than the researched, and how might we build upon indigenous ways of knowing? So we're going to do this for 7 minutes, and then we'll come back for questions.